Okay, everybody good?
Well, thank you, everybody, and let me thank Gary and the DSCC for hosting us. I'll have a little more to say about that later. But first, I want us to say that this election is a vindication for Democrats and our agenda, but far more importantly, it's a victory for the American people. Last week, Americans turned out to support the progress they've seen from Democrats over the last 2 years and to vote against the Republican MAGA agenda against autocracy. We had amazing candidates. Our incumbents here put in the work. They were just amazing in terms of focus, in terms of not being thrown off course, not letting the relentless attacks on them get to them in any way. But most importantly, the people with me here are just talented public servants who over the last 6 years have done so much and will get even more done in the next 6 years as senators. And we have 2 new senators coming for help. I met early this morning with Peter Welch and John Fetterman, who both ran first-grade campaigns as well. And since I've been majority leader, every incumbent has won their race, and we're going to keep that record going with Raphael Warnock in Georgia. We're going to keep that streak alive. As I've said many times, Raphael Warnock can help Georgia much better than anybody, and I'm confident he can prevail in December. Look at what he's done. He's been a leader in capping insulin at $35 a month for elderly people on Medicare. He's been a leader on voting rights, so important to the people of Georgia. He's been a leader on expanding health care with the ACA growing so that more people are covered and people pay less. So he's amazing, and he's going to win because he's much better for Georgia than his opponent, plain and simple. And in general, so 2 things happened at the same time in the last 2 years. We had an amazing record of legislative accomplishment, which everyone here partook in a very serious way. And against all the pundits, we kept the majority in the Senate. The 2 are completely related. What we got done mattered to the American people. The Republicans were busy throwing fireballs over the wall, incendiary, divisive, nasty comments. They embraced the big lie, so many of the candidates. And it seemed alluring on a day-by-day basis, and a lot of the pundits and prognosticators paid attention to that. But the people actually saw, the American people saw 2 things. They saw what we had done and were going to do. And frankly, they were worried that this new MAGA Republican Party was different than the Republican Party that they knew. And so even some Republicans and independents in all of these races said, I may be a Reagan Republican, I may be a Bush Republican, but I am not a MAGA Republican, and I can't tolerate this assault on democracy. In June, people saw that. They saw it in the Dobbs decision, and abortion was a huge issue for us. They saw it in the hearings on about January 6th, where they saw these hooligans invade the Capitol and beat police officers up. And they saw it in the extremist comments of so many Republicans, which too much of the Republican leadership never rebutted. So they began to say, this is not my Republican Party. But they said, what about the Democrats? Can they ever get anything done? And we had gotten quite a bit done before, but in June, July, and the first week in August, we passed 6 major bills, 5 of them bipartisan, on veterans, on guns, on jobs in America, on climate, on prescription drugs. And they said, wow, they're talking about things that matter to me. And so by August, I was confident, and when I said this, people poo-pooed it, that we were going to keep the Senate and that every one of our incumbents was going to win and we were going to pick up seats, and here we are. So this has been, and the one final thing I'd say, which I said on the floor today, I hope our Republican colleagues, the non-MAGA ones, will work with us in a bipartisan way over the next 2 years so we can get stuff done. They should realize that embracing MAGA is very bad for America, but not very good for their party either, as this election showed. So, I want to thank everyone here. but I particularly want to thank Gary Peters of the DSCC. He's done an amazing job. He has been, again, just like the people running, never blown off course, always had a plan, stuck with the plan, made sure we raised the money that we needed, and more importantly, kept helping, guiding, bolstering candidates through all the attacks in every way that he could. And the DSCC staff has been great. Christy is not here. She's the most brilliant political person I've ever met. And she's worked at the DSCC now for 6 years. More? Yeah. She's been amazing. And she's not here because she's busy working. I also, not part of this, but the Super PAC staff led by J.P. Persh did an amazing job as well. We raised as much money as the Republicans, $3 million less, about 380 to 375, and that helped as well. And as Gary will tell you, both sides spent more money than they ever have before on ground game, which really helped us. And that was, again, the great work of the DSCC and the people who worked on the ground. The final people I think we all want to thank are the thousands and thousands and thousands of citizens who cared about making America a better place, who cared about preserving our democracy, who got out there day in and day out and worked for these folks. They are what America's all about, and together, as democracy was really being eroded, we pushed back and said, the roots of democracy are deep and are going to stay. With that, let me call on Gary.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, and really, I want to give big kudos to Leader Schumer for getting us to this point. Thank you, Chuck, for your leadership. Certainly the leadership when it comes to delivering on policies that impact people's lives in meaningful ways. Our great candidates that were here were able to run because of the accomplishments that we were able to achieve in a 50-50 Senate, which is not an easy place to be. And yet Chuck Schumer showed incredible leadership in pulling people together to get things done. And then from a campaign perspective, Chuck knows an awful lot about campaigns as well. And it's great to have your assistance and help through the Super PAC as well. And I also want to just thank the amazing folks at the DSCC. I'm blessed to be surrounded by just some absolutely amazing people. Christy Roberts, as mentioned, as our executive director, is without question a superstar. It was wonderful to have her leadership here as an executive director, but everybody from every position here at the DS, everybody gave their heart and their soul for this victory. But we couldn't have done any of that if it wasn't for amazing incumbents and candidates that were running. There's no question that the difference makers were the folks who were actually on the ballot, whose name were on the ballot. I was a lot more relaxed. I was not on the ballot. They were more stressed as folks who were out there fighting each and every day. And it was clear, as Leader Schumer mentioned, the contrast between our incumbents and candidates versus their opponents was significant, and the American people understood that. And they were successful as a result of that. The efforts of the DSCC, just want to highlight a couple. As Leader Schumer mentioned, we took a fairly strategic approach right from the get-go as we looked at this election, and as I looked at the election. We knew all of these races were going to be really tight. These races, many of them will be in the margin of error. I know there was a lot of chatter at the end how they're starting to tighten, and I could have all told any of you, if you asked me a year and a half ago, are these going to be tight races, I would have said absolutely they're going to be tight. So we were not surprised by that. We were following the races closely. All of our data that we were looking at was pretty consistent. We were confident we were going to win because of the quality of the candidates that were running. But we also knew that we had to have an aggressive ground operation. The way you win these really tight races is that you actually ensure that voters getting to the polls and are going to be able to make sure that their voice is heard. And so we put an unprecedented amount of resources and built ground operations in each of our key states. And the results, of course, are historic. To be able to bring our incumbents back, we'll soon bring all of our incumbents back when we win in Georgia on December 6th. But we were able to invest over $60 million on the ground, which is more than we've ever done throughout history, more than we did on independent expenditures. And it's that strategy that not only won on Election Day, but is also going to win on December 6th as well when we return Raphael Warnock to the Senate. But I want to introduce now one of our wonderful candidates, Patty Murray, who has been an incredible member of the Senate for a long time. She also knows a lot about campaigning. She actually ran the DSCC twice, which is great that she did that. Wonderful. And in the end, there was a lot of chatter about that race, but we knew that Senator Murray had delivered for the people of the state of Washington over many years, and the people of the state of Washington understood that, and they gave her a strong victory. Thank you, Patty.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. It is really great to be here with our Senate Majority Leader and our Chairman who fought and won the Senate Majority for us, and all of my incredible colleagues who you will hear from in a minute. They really are the reason we won. Senate Democratic candidates were better than the other side. It was pretty plain to see for all of us who were out there. And we also ran better on message. Democrats, as Senator Schumer talked about, our leader talked about, we offered real solutions to create good paying jobs and lower costs, and we made it clear that we are working to do a lot more. I've heard a lot of people say that Republicans had no economic message. Well, that's wrong. They just had a bad one. Democrats lowered the cost of prescription drugs, we upgraded our infrastructure, and we brought back American manufacturing. Republicans wanted to cut Social Security, wanted to ban abortion nationwide, and a lot of them couldn't even admit that Donald Trump lost the last election. Senate Democrats fought to codify Roe and protect women, and voters in this country saw that Senate Republicans blocked us. They saw Senate Republicans bent on forcing women to stay pregnant even when they did not want to be, and no matter their circumstances. They saw Republicans in the country criminalizing doctors and trying to hold women captive in their own states to keep them from getting life-saving reproductive health care. Voters saw that cruelty and made themselves heard with their voices and their votes. Democrats won in November, and we are going to win again when we re-elect Senator Warnock in December. With that, I am delighted to turn it over to Michael Bennett.
Thanks, Patty. Chuck, thank you for everything. Gary, thank you for everything. It's wonderful to be here with my colleagues who I think I don't really think of as politicians. I think of them as public servants, the best kind of public servants we can have. In Colorado, before this election even started and before the inflation we were going to confront happened, in one of the most dynamic economies in America, what I heard in my town halls was people were killing themselves at work, but no matter what they did, they couldn't afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education. They couldn't save. They felt like they were going to turn a more diminished life over to their kids than the life that they had lived. And that is the result of 40 years of trickle-down supply-side economics that started with Ronald Reagan and carried right through Donald Trump, the outsourcing that characterized that era. And that's what we ran against in Colorado this year, and that's what Colorado voted against. We want to turn the page on that supply-side economics so that we create an economy again in this country that when it grows for everybody, not just the people at the very top, which is what we've seen over the last 40 years or so. I'm very grateful that in Colorado we won non-college educated voters in my state as a result, I think, of that economic message. We won 70% of the Latino vote in Colorado as a result of that economic message. And the proof points that we had were very important. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, a reflection of investing in Americans again. The CHIPS Act, which was, as Patty mentioned, bringing manufacturing back to the United States of America. I can tell you, people in Colorado want to see more of that, not less of that. That was a wildly popular bill in my state. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, where we've been fighting for generations to cap drug prices for seniors, to require Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people, cap insulin at $35 a month. That was a bill we had to pass without a single Republican vote. In fact, not only did they not vote for the bill, they actually took out the part of the bill that would have capped insulin for everybody in the country. No one in Colorado can understand that. And that looked like an incredibly constructive record of beginning of turning the page on that supply-side economics offering the American people a different vision for the future, an economy that they can participate in, and a stronger democracy as well. And to them, that looked like a relief compared to the chaos that Donald Trump represented. And the last thing they needed when they were facing the kind of challenges they were facing because of broken supply chains across the world and because of rising energy prices, because of a recovering economy and Putin's invasion in Russia, the last thing they needed was a return to Trumpism, and I think that's why we were as successful as we were. I want to thank the voters of Colorado for their confidence, and I can't wait to get back there to say thank you to them. With that, let me turn it over to my great colleague from New Hampshire. I never had any doubt she was going to win because I think that if we all followed her leadership, we'd have a majority forever in this Senate. Maggie has it.
Thank you. Well, Michael, thank you for that introduction. It is really great to be here with my colleagues, and I too want to thank Senator Schumer for his leadership, Senator Peters for his, and congratulate Senator Bennett, and Senator Murray, and Senator Cortez Masto, and Senator Kelly on great, great victories for the people of your states and for our country. And it really is an honor to continue to serve with all of you. Look, last week in New Hampshire, what we saw, what we heard was resounding support for common sense, for individual freedom, and for democracy. All of those issues matter deeply to the people in my state. In the Granite State, we put together a grassroots campaign that met voters where they were, whether it was at their doors, speaking to the strong investment in grassroots that my colleagues talked about, whether it was at shift changes in a factory, at a small business, or just at a retail stop. We were talking to Granite Staters about what mattered to them. And they made clear, as they always do, that they wanted their leaders to put aside their differences and work together to address the priorities that they tell us are important to them. Now, I was able to talk about my record of doing just that, but it was also really, really important to people that they were rejecting an assault on our democracy. They were rejecting an assault on the reproductive rights, the personal freedoms of half of the population, and they were rejecting extremists generally. So we were able to talk to people about what mattered to them. I think one of my favorite anecdotes from the trail was when a volunteer came back and said she had been knocking and asking people what was important to them, and she met a man at his door, probably about my age, mid-60s, and she said, "What's the most important issue to you?" And he said, "Well, lots of issues," but then he pulled his 8-year-old granddaughter next to him and said, "This election, I'm voting for her." Right? We heard throughout this election that people wanted us to be thinking about the future for our children, whether that was about protecting women's individual rights, whether that was about finally freeing ourselves from the chokehold that big oil has on this country and moving to a clean energy economy that would also fight climate change, whether that was just making sure that at the end of the day, people could turn out and vote and know that their voice and their vote mattered. So I am really, really excited to be back so that we can continue this work, reaching across the aisle, finding common ground, moving forward on the issues that matter to our voters. And I look forward to being able to do that as part of a majority, including Senator Warnock, who is going to win his election on December 6th. And with that, let me introduce to you a great fighter for Nevada families, a great leader in the United States Senate, my friend and colleague, Catherine Cortez-Masto.
Thank you. So I too want to thank our Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. Thank Gary Peters and the whole DSCC team. Did an incredible job. And to my colleagues, congratulations, congratulations. And I know the tough fights that you undertook in your states. You know, holding the Senate majority was critical for the people of Nevada as well. When I was first running for the Senate, one of the top things I heard from Nevadans was a high price of prescription drugs. And I'll never forget it. I was in Carson City running the first time. I was with a group of seniors, and they looked at me and they said, "We've got to do something about these high cost prescription drugs." And they said, "We know you were the Attorney General, We know what you did, holding the big banks accountable. We know you will go to Washington, prosecute this case, and address this issue. And I was able to go back and say to them, we did it. We did it. We focused on issues that mattered to so many Americans, including Nevadans, not just the high cost of prescription drugs, but capping the cost of insulin, making sure we're doing everything we can to address their out-of-pocket costs. And that was just one of many things I was able to go back to my state to talk about. You know, I will say the issue of Roe versus Wade was just as important in Nevada. Nevada is a proud pro-choice state, and voters in 1990 voted to codify Roe versus Wade. But that did, to them, it was about not only preserving that in the state of Nevada, but fighting for it for so many women across the country. So when Dobbs happened and the United States Supreme Court repealed Roe versus Wade, there was an outrage in the state of Nevada. And it wasn't just Democrats, it was Republicans, it was nonpartisans, and it wasn't just women, it was men. I was hearing all over the state from so many Nevadans that were just upset. It mattered to them. It mattered to them that we do something about it. And we elect people who are going to protect women's reproductive freedom. So, you know, there was a lot of talk that, oh, don't worry, Nevada, it's settled law, it's protected, so you don't have to worry about that in this election. I'm telling you, Nevada didn't matter, because they know I had been talking about a federal abortion ban that my Republican colleagues were going to try to introduce that would preempt our state law, and then Lindsey Graham introduced it. And so it mattered to Nevadans. They saw what was going to happen long term, and so for them it was important to stand up. It is also important to recognize that as I was on talking to Nevadans, and like Maggie, I do believe you got to show up and go to where they are. Nevada's a 24/7 town. We have 3 shifts. I was at those shifts, meeting so many Nevadans and talking to them and listening to them about the issues that matter to them. And I will tell you, they're also concerned. Remember, our working class, majority of Nevada's working class are in Southern Nevada. I know it well because that's my family. I grew up in that industry. And their retirement, quite often, is Social Security and Medicare. So when they're hearing Republicans are out there talking about if they take the majority, they're going to sunset that or they're going to cut it, it makes a difference. There's work to be done. There's no doubt about it. We have to continue the work that we have already started in lowering costs. High cost of gas, we have one of the highest in Nevada, next to California. Housing costs are still unaffordable. But there's work and we have ideas and solutions about how to get it done. And we're not afraid to take on big oil to bring them to the table to work with us. That's what it's about when you have a Democratic majority that is focused on Nevadans, but focused on this country and ensuring that nobody gets left behind. Nobody. And I will tell you, this weekend I was proud because I had the support of so many people across the state, Republicans, Democrats, nonpartisans, so many people. I was at a Latina-owned Mexican restaurant, and there was a celebration because they had worked so hard and had come out to help me get reelected. And I was walking through, thanking everyone and talking with them, and a Latina came up to me and she whispered in my ear, she said, I want you to know, I'm a Republican, but I know that you know who we are and that you will fight for us and our families and our future. And I say that to you because there were so many across Nevada just like that had the courage even to come forward and support what I know and we know is that when we work on behalf of people in this country to solve problems and not create them, we can move forward so that really nobody is left behind in this country. And so I am so pleased to join my colleagues here and thank you all again. And now I get to turn this over to another fighter I know so well because he is my neighbor in the state. We watch what happens in Arizona very closely in Nevada, and so pleased that he was reelected, Senator Mark Kelly.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I spent the last 46 months as a candidate.
Oh,
Now it's 6 years.
It's been quite the grind, I have to say. Got other things in my career that took a long time, but this was quite something. And I'm honored that the good people of Arizona have entrusted me with doing this job for another 6 years. I kind of feel for Reverend Warnock that he's still at this. I'm confident we're going to get him across the finish line because he is the right person, for this job here. I want to thank a couple folks in this room. First Catherine, who, as the head of the DS last time, was so critical in helping me being successful in 2020. But Gary, over the last couple of years, and of course Senator Schumer, who has worked incredibly hard to help all of us up here today be successful. I think after a tough election, it can be tempting to focus on the things that divide us. I think we've all experienced this, especially when you're running for election or re-election. But we've also seen the consequences that come when leaders refuse to accept the truth and focus more on conspiracies of the past than solving the challenges we face. In Arizona, we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years. And we've got challenges in front of us. I spent a lot of my time flying a little airplane around the state of Arizona so I can get to all corners rather quickly, reduce the amount of time I spend in the car. That also means that folks like Senator Schumer can't call me because I'm in the airplane.
800s.
But folks are really struggling. I mean, high costs, for families. Our border in Arizona is still a mess. Needs to be addressed. We need comprehensive immigration reform. It's incredibly important for our state, but also for the country. We've got tens of thousands of dreamers in Arizona. Who I look at as American as my own two kids. We've got a drought in the West. Catherine and Michael and I, we share this. The upper and lower basin states of the Colorado River, we have to solve this problem. A lot of our food comes from the Southwest. And it's important to our food supply. We've got this historic drought. I mean, there's so many issues, and I'm convinced the best way to solve these is by working together. We demonstrated that. I mean, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill, veterans health care, postal reform, gun safety legislation, all came in a bipartisan way. And I think we get better solutions when we work together. So I'm looking forward to continuing this work for the state of Arizona. It's been the honor of my life to serve in the United States Senate. I spent 25 years in the Navy. And obviously my naval service has been very important to me, and also my service at NASA. But the impact that this Senate over the last 2 years had on the American people and the future of this country cannot be overstated. It was significant, and I look forward to doing more of that. Thank you.
We're gonna take a couple questions. So if you could just say what outlet you're with, and we gotta get them moving. So we'll just take a little bit. But go ahead.
Sahil Kapoor with NBC News. I want to ask Senator Schumer and any other candidates, going forward, what is the role of abortion in American politics? Do you think this was a one-off, voters taking out their anger on the Supreme Court, or is this a new permanent feature where the same voters will be mobilized? And do you expect to run on that issue again?
I'll answer that for us. Women's reproductive rights is essential to American people, American women and men. And they rose up and they said that in this election, and we are here to protect that for them. And we will continue to do that, and I believe it will continue to be an issue until we can codify Roe into law for all Americans.
I just would add that the idea that women would be relegated to second-class citizenship is a palpable concern from voters all across New Hampshire. We are the live free or die state, and we mean it. And individual freedom means everything. That's where it starts. Our economy, our leadership in the world will be diminished if we do not respect the fundamental rights of half the population.
And one other thing we're going to keep doing is putting good judges who understand women's rights on the bench. Now, we have the Supreme Court, obviously, but lots of the decisions just are limited in the district courts and then the Court of Appeals and never get to the Supreme Court. And we're going to continue to do that in this lame duck and as we move forward.
Go ahead, Bob.
Leader Schumer, both parties obviously very aggressively pursued Latino voters in this election. I was wondering if you're planning to try to push the DACA legislation through during the lame duck.
Look, we think that, again, this shows the importance of the courts. They go to a right-wing court, and the right-wing court blocks DACA. We want to get DACA done. We'd like to get whatever we can done in the lame duck session. A number of our senators, led by Senators Durbin and Padilla, as well as Senator Sinema and others working in a bipartisan way, we're going to try to get something done in the lame duck.
Thank you.
Jacob Rubashkin from Inside Elections. You had such a good night so many places across the country. Fell just short in Wisconsin. What happened there? Why weren't you able to get over the finish line there as opposed to so many other places?
Well, you know, these are all really tight competitive races. And certainly Mandel Barnes won a grand race. It came very, very close. But you know, we had to also focus from a DSCC perspective that we were focused primarily on bringing all of the incumbents back. That's the number one goal of this organization. That's going to continue when we bring back Raphael Warnock. But he had the resources. It's a tough state. Pardon?
He had the resources.
He had the resources that he needed. The other side had resources. And one thing that we certainly saw in this, especially at the end of this campaign, the other side just poured money into these races with negative, nasty, false ads, and that certainly has an impact. But he had the resources. He came very short. But I'm confident he will have a bright future in politics going forward. We're going to see him again. And we're certainly pleased with the effort that he put forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
A lot of you guys ran against Matt Holt, National Journal. A lot of you guys ran against election deniers. Are you surprised that most of the candidates have conceded their races?
Most have.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah.
Well, you know, my hope, and this goes not just to the election deniers who ran, but my hope, and I've said this repeatedly since we've won, is that the non-MAGA Republicans will join with us and work in a bipartisan way to get the kinds of things we got done in the last 2 years. Because that's better for the country, but frankly, that's better for the Republican Party. If they continue to embrace MAGA, they're going to lose. And this election showed that that is not where the American people are at. They're not at this extreme, election-denying, nasty, divisive, threatening violence, and on occasion using violence against people. That's not democratic. And this is one of the things that gives me such great heart about this election. Everyone said, oh, our democracy's on edge, and we all worried about it. It's a real worry. But the roots of democracy are deep, and they're deep in the hearts and souls of the American people. They sort of smelled what was going on. And it wasn't just liberal Democrats, it was moderates and even conservatives who said, I don't like this. And I'm not going to support a party that seems to, at least at the very minimum, countenance it, and at the very maximum, encourage it. Very worst, encourage it.
So we got to get going, so this will be the last one, so go ahead.
Thank you. Neil Slesniewski with Roll Call. Senator Schumer and or Senator Murray, will Senator Murray be the incoming president pro tempore in January?
That's something we will be discussing.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Good. All right, thank you.